Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome to the show Dr. Bayo Akomolafe. Bayo is a psychologist, educator, philosopher, and teacher working and playing principally in the fields of decoloniality and ecology. He joins us today for a very special episode that marks the culmination of the premium member course on custodianship to talk about making sanctuary, fugitive spaces, and post-activism. Now, just a little heads up before we begin, the audio is terrible for the first 10 minutes only. And then we discover the wrong mic was plugged in and it instantly fixes itself and then is glorious. I've left that part in, but it is a little difficult to hear. If you've got headphones, you'll be fine. But for instance, if you're driving and you can't quite get it, you may just want to skip to about 10 minutes in and come back to the beginning later and find out if Bayo was a weird kid. There's also one or two mic dropouts a little bit later on. And the lesson in all this, kids, is don't record a show during the Mercury station. Anyway, killer chat. Enjoy. Bayo Akomalafe, thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Gordon, for inviting me here. Great to be with you.
Nice one, nice one. Well, you are a first guest, Bayo. Well, this is your first time on the show, and that means you get like the traditional first question. Are you ready for it?
Probably not.
Yeah, all right. Bayo, were you a weird kid?
Oh, that is a profound question. Threw me off. Yeah, I was. I was quirky. I didn't have lots of friends. Deeply nerdish. Yeah, hated bugs, and tried almost set my house on fire one day trying to act as a cartoon Super Ted who flies and flies with rocket fuel, and I tried to attach matchsticks to my shoes to blast out into the atmosphere. Yeah, so I was weird. Pretty weird.
Gosh, I remember Super Ted.
You do? Really?
Yeah.
That's good. I haven't met many people who even understand the reference. That's really good.
Well, we sort of both grew up very differently, but in Edges of Empire, right? So
of course.
I grew up in Australia, so we got a lot of secondhand British TV and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, us as well.
Nice one. Well, I mean, on that, I know from your biography that you grew up in quite a sort of Christian context. Do you think that added to the weirdness in some way?
Well, growing up, maybe that added to the pressure of conformity, actually, because it was this norm. It was the norm, right, to be Christian or to be raised in a Muslim household, and I just couldn't bend my mind, as small as I was, to gleefully accept the precepts and the propositions of my faith. I was always reading Darwinian texts and wanted to understand things from a different point of view, which didn't fit well with my world. But eventually I caved, especially when my father passed away. I caved and surrendered to the pressure. I needed that sense of stability. But it wasn't too long before I burst out of the plantation again because I was asking dangerous questions about about the things that we're asked to believe.
So I know you've kind of picked up on some of that before, but as I was putting the questions together, I think a lot of people leave, and for the right reasons, leave childhood faiths, you know, to go on their own journeys and so on. But like, given the context that you're in and the adventure that's been your life so far, where are you at with, say, something like the Bible now? Does it still have the kind of childhood unsatisfying mouthfeel, or can you kind of come back to it and think, actually, no, I'm finding some medicine here?
I think medicine is, the world is replete with healing in medicine and insights and wisdom. When I was what I would call a practicing Christian, I thought as Christianity as an ontological norm, right? The only way to truly be in the world was to believe the same things that I did. So I was extra conservative. I wrote a book when I was a sophomore called Moses or Darwin. When I was supposed to be studying psychology, I was writing a book about Noah's Ark and reason and faith and irreducible complexity, you know, to show that like the bacteria and micro critters basically are designed, you know, it's a creationist thinking. I wrote a book, it was 300 pages, I think, as a sophomore. Never got to publish it, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But that was the world that was my exoskeleton, and I thought through, did everything through, and with that world. Now, from where I sit, I no longer see the world as needing some originary point, you know, some Cartesian burst of beginnings, where we can return to and trace our origin or evolution or something like that. I see the world more rhizomatic, like a rhizome. It's more complex. It's non-hierarchical. It's not arborescent. It's constantly shifting and moving. So there isn't, in this kind of processual relational universe, an abandonment. You know, even if I can say I'm no longer a practicing Christian, I still draw theoretically heavily from the Bible. You know, I still speak about confusion and the Tower of Babel. I still think of Jesus as a libertarian, you know, a rebel, a fugitive of some kind, whose teachings have some bearing. I wouldn't trust in the notion of truth. You know, I think truth is the luxury of those who stand straight, you know, of rectitude, of colonial empire building. I would say that it's a spring, it's a well, and I drink from it. Most of the time I move elsewhere and I drink from other worlds as well, which means that the world is richer than my faith could ever have permitted, actually.
And how do you get to that sort of drinking from multiple wells approach from a Christian childhood? I mean, was that part of the decision to initially go into psychology as a study?
I was actually wanting to study philosophy, and it was only psychology because that university was a first-time university, just like I'm the first-time guest on the room soup. You know, with you, it was a new university, and we're the first set in the university, the first class. So I went to psychology instead. I during my undergraduate days, I was more heavily into reconfirming and reinforcing my faith, basically. But then I started to read deeply into, and this is where psychology connects with and research connects with what happened with my faith. I started to want to explore the world in ways that were not quantitative. And so that led me to qualitative research paradigms, which informed my views, my emerging views about stories, and how stories disturb the idea that the world is singular, the world is still and stable and fixed and static, and knowable and describable. The idea of qualitative research kind of ushered me into a different way of thinking about truth. And that opened me up because I've always been inquisitive and curious about next edges. That opened me up to adventures that have brought me here.
So I guess there are some phrases you use. I didn't do psychology, but my father's a psychiatrist, and I've been interested in it my whole life, and blah blah blah.
Okay. Right.
There seem to be some concepts and maybe even some thinkers that have sort of stayed with you over time. I mean, are there thinkers from your psychology days that continue to inspire you?
Not really.
No?
Actually, I've picked up people that I wish I actually studied in my undergraduate, postgraduate days. I hated Freud.
That's understandable.
I hated Freud and the psychosexual implications of human development. It kind of clashed with my view of moral probity. It was some kind of scandalous view of humans. But I deeply appreciate the opening up, the opening up of the idea that we are not as rational as we think, that rationality is already circumvented and queered, if you will, by affect and emotionality and deeply unconscious motives. But I can't really say that I draw heavily from even humanist thinkers. None of those guys impress me today. Instead, I would draw from my own Yoruba indigenous philosophies. They don't have celebrities like Western psychology does, but that makes it even more important to me. At this point in time, though, I am really excited about James Hillman, who founded I don't think he liked to be known as a founder of anything, but he founded archetypal psychology, and he was a student and colleague of Carl Jung. And James Hillman basically, his idea that the psyche is not in the mind, but the mind is the psyche. It plays beautifully and coincides wondrously with my post-humanist thinking and work, that we're not all that. Human beings are not all that. Instead, the world is larger, more complex, more agential, more vital, more animated than our notions, of human centricity or anthropocentricity might allow us to notice.
Yes, couldn't agree more. There's a theory of mind challenge with things like humanism, where it fixates on, whilst humans might be special, they're not special in the sense of different or distinguished, and it's really interesting. And I kind of like it's funny. Post-humanism is this idea of like decentering the human and realizing that it's not really the yardstick by which you measure the universe, but in a funny cosmic way, you end up, I was thinking about this the other day, you can get the whole way back and go, all right, well, if the psyche isn't in me, I'm in it, then in actual fact, there is only the human. Not like solipsistically, but in a cosmic, almost monist sense, that you have to drop the specialness of the human to find its edges, which is the edges of the universe, because it's all kind of that one thing, if you know what I mean. I'm not necessarily a monist, but I like the idea of the full circle of it.
Well, I wouldn't even discard the human exceptionality. I think thinking about it, post-humanism isn't the absolute repudiation of human exceptionality. I think it does want to make it contingent. on other relations, that it has conditions, even if we were special. And this being special is not a binary. It's not a Cartesian binary, where we are hovering above the material world. To understand our exceptionality, it's possibly the case that we can do things that other animals cannot do. I don't know how we can know that. There's no way we can step outside of representation to step outside of the human, if you will, to think like a plant or to see like a stone. But as much as we know and as much as we can tell, or some of us can tell, I don't want to speak for everyone, we are quite unique. But this uniqueness has to always be rooted. It has to be rooted in the modern human, so that post-human processes, modern human processes are always implicated in how we become human and what the meaning of the human could be.
Yeah, I like that. I also, to sort of add to it, I don't think it's not just that we can't know if we have skills that other aspects of creation don't have, or capacities rather than skills, because as you say, it's very difficult to get outside of it to do it, but we also can't take that much credit for it, right? So what I'm thinking of there is agency. So So, I mean, talk to me about that. What's your understanding of agency? Because I think whatever the human is, whatever everything is kind of relationally composed anyway, right? So if we talk about the specialness of the human, we might be special, but I don't think we did it. Do you know what I mean? On our own.
Right. Yes, I agree. Well, I would want to strip away agency from what Husserl would call, the founder of phenomenology, would call intentionality. The human gaze, consciousness, sentience. And when we think about agency in a popular way, in conventional terms, we think about it as, the ability to do stuff. And we kind of appropriate this property to ourselves. This is us. We can do stuff. Computers only do what we tell them to do. The world outside of us is mechanical, it's not thinking, it's not acting really. But if we take that away, if we remove this notion of intentionality as important to the notion of agency, then we can see that the world is always acting, that the world always makes effects. And that's what agency means to me, this idea of what the Yoruba people call orita, which is translated as, poorly translated if you ask me, as the crossroads. And it's at the crossroads that agency dwells in Yoruba cosmovisions. What does that mean? That the world is constantly acting, constantly undoing itself, as you would do when you get at the crossroads and there are other beings and agencies acting, interacting, cross-cutting each other. And I think we're beginning to find this out in very unique ways. I've been speaking about epistemic situationism and some work from some psychologists that demonstrated that furniture like tables and chairs and the softness of these items can actually have monumental effects on our judgments, the things that we would allocate to ourselves as unique human attributes, integrity, moral righteousness or something. And they did this with judges, I think, in an experiment, field experiment, where they found that judges who sat on soft cushiony seats were more likely to be lenient in their courts. And those who had hard, rigid tables and furniture around them were very strict. I think that disturbs the idea that we're apart, that we are separate, ontologically separate from the things around us. So this is how I think of agency. Bacteria infects us, but more than infects us, it is part of what the human is. A virus just tanked the global economy. Tables have effects on us. Xerox machines, computer screens, pixels, everything is in constant jubilation, if you will. There's a festivity about life and about death that means everything is open-ended, and that flattens our claims to superiority.
It also, and this is one of the things I love about your work, Bayo, it also widens out the implications of intervention, of the things that humans can do, of capacities to save and make change, and how we might do it. Because when you sit with agency as that sort of becomingness of everything, you realize that this is poorly described, but other stuff is moving, and you are not in. You are not the sole decision maker, even in your own actions. So that we return to that sort of theory of mind and how we situate ourselves in the face of challenges, right?
Yeah, it's again, the mind and the psyche thing, is powerful here, and I think James Hillman might have said or agreed with the idea that the so-called gods that were supposedly banished with modern arrival, with industrial flatness, and the urge to scale heights, to build further and further into the atmosphere, to establish our dominance and permanence, that the gods are still here. They're buried and alive in furniture, in pillars, in stairwells, in wall paint, in things around us. The world is archetypally active. And so the presumption that humans act unilaterally in some unidirectional pattern, that that's liberal humanism. We take decisions, we're rational agents, and we just spill our agency into the feminine world, awaiting passively our salvation. Post-activism, what I call post-activism, is the redescription of agency in its interactions with our concerns around social justice and movement and change. And I think one of the tenets there is the way we think about the crisis is part of the crisis. And that sometimes, even in acting, even in our solutionism, we're actively, and this may not be known to us, but we act within assemblages, we act within networks of being. And this means that we risk reinforcing our crisis, our challenges, our problems, under the guise, masquerading as innovation. We're actually doubling down, on the troubles that beleaguer us. So the invitation of post-activism is to blast out of that container, not unilaterally. There's no confident, guarantee here that we can do so on our own, but it is to create the spaces, where we can attend to that as a gift from the world itself when the world kicks back, and then to do things with that idea.
Yeah, I love the idea of, and I think it's sort of urgent for 2020, given that it's almost like the appeal of activism, or the appeal of unilateral action in what you think is the direction of something you desire or consider to be good in the world, is really fraught, right? Like if you look at what's happened over so far in the first 3 acts of 2020, the urgency for thinking from a post-activist perspective, I think, couldn't be clearer. And I think part of that is, if you have systems that recognize and can conceive of their opposition, they're actually part of the system. And I'm thinking of some of the sort of heart in the right place, yet nothing quite, yet still remaining within the system, that's happened, for instance, over the summer in the United States. Yes.
I mean, it's good to. This is where being a nerd pays, wonderfully. There's a movie on Netflix called I Am Mother. I don't know if you've watched it, Gordon.
I haven't, but I know the one you mean. Yeah.
Okay. I Am Mother, and it just describes this post-apocalyptic future that is run by a single robot who is like a mother to a single child that is supposed to be the reinvention of humanity. And I'm not going to spoil it because I hear that's a huge thing out in from the outside the global south. It's huge to spoil movies, but I'm going to say that I guess I'm going to spoil it.
Go
so
for
close
it.
Your ears if you don't want to. The movie ends with the protagonist believing, as you would if you're the hero of a classical 80s action movie, that she saved the day. I'm just going to speak vaguely, and the evil mother who has held her down in this laboratory condition for so long dies. However, the mother's death, this AI, this artificial intelligence's death, long protagonist to feel like a hero, to feel like she made it, is part of the plan. And I felt that was troubling, to say the least, that even salvation, even our salvation, even when we think we've won, as my friend here in India would say, that if we beat them at their own game, we've lost. It's that we're entangled and mangled with dynamics and algorithms and computational pathways and ideologies and sticky premises that exceed the human, and this defeats and disturbs liberal humanist positions that we can unilaterally come together, think up a solution, and merely apply it, if only we had political will and more financial resources.
Yeah.
This is the idea of slowing down, and slowing down not as taking a break or taking a holiday, but literally coming to a place of generative incapacitation, like unlearning mastery. And, this really plays out, like you said, brother, this plays out with the pandemic. We're rushing to find a vaccine right now. And I think some people are quite aware that, finding a vaccine is not a solution to this. The virus is not just a reducible, infinitesimal critter, like a monster. You can hear it in the language. We shall defeat the virus. We shall get back out there. We shall return to the norm. But the normal created the virus, in a sense. If we think about the virus as a rhizomatic entity, as a being still becoming, it's industrial activity, it's encroachment on environment, it's the idea that we've made it. All of these things are part of the assemblage that is part of the body of the virus. The virus is not just made up of biological parts or chemical parts. It's made up of political, spiritual, anthropological parts as well, just like we are made up of viruses. So we feed into each other. And I fear that the rush into just creating a vaccine is another reductionistic, humanist attempt to solve a problem when, in fact, we are reinforcing the problem.
Yeah, I think something I'll get you to unpack a little bit more there is that notion of unlearning mastery, because, but before we do, just to what your friend in India said, I know you're a fan of Ursula Le Guin as well. And one of my favorite lines of hers from The Found and the Lost is, how you play is what you win. And that is a warning against mastery and solutionism and that idea that if we just had more money, or if we just had the house, or if we just had better technology, this continuous this is that liberal humanism thing, and it's all and if that conception is in fact the sort of parent of all these subsequent effects, then doing more of it doesn't do anything. And it's it's an intellectual challenge, right? But like unlearning mastery is absolutely is a really potent spell, Bayo, like as a combination of words, because it's got the unlearning and inside mastery is master and the arrogance and the dominance that comes with it. So I mean, when you say unlearning mastery, how are you using that spell?
If I think of it as a concept, like a Deleuzian concept, to map this concept of unlearning mastery, I would include in this map the how do I put it? The kickback of the world around us. Like, and this disturbs the idea that we can just, that it's entirely human to just do so, to unlearn mastery. Again, that seems like an instigation of mastery, right? It seems like we're doubling down on mastery. If the motivation, the instigations, the dynamics of unlearning mastery were fully and firmly situated in human relations, then that's another iteration of mastery. So I would put in this map of unlearning mastery the instigations of the world around us. And I think of these instigations as prophetic inquiry. And what do I mean by that? I forget this explosion that happened somewhere in Russia, Siberia in 1918, if I'm...
Tunguska, the
Tunguska event, yes, 1918, and the flattening, this explosion that flattened tens of thousands, of trees, and land. I don't think it injured anyone, but for a space of time, it rendered the surface. It liquefied the surface. It liquefied the ground. And I think of this liquefaction. Is that the right term? Am I playing with words here? Might as well. I think of this rendering fluid of the ground as an opening up of new possibilities, right? Like most of the time we're calcified in ways of responding, unknown to us, because consciousness is also material. We shouldn't think of it as something transcendent beyond the material. And so we're caught up in this toxic cyclicity, continuing to do what we think is the right thing to do. And then something bursts, something transversal, like a pandemic, like a Tunguska event, or some other thing that is outside of that assemblage, cracks open this assemblage, and then breaks into the economy of relations, and then new possibilities, emerge. I think of this instigation as part of unlearning mastery. That when the world kicks back, a crack in the ground appears, metaphorically speaking, or I might even go so far as to say figuratively speaking, more than just a metaphor. Like a crack in the ground appears, and this crack is an invitation. So beyond the instigation, there becomes an invitation, and the invitation is this lure, the lure of the new. Come into the ground, shapeshift, lose the shapes that you are exhausted with. In this case, the human. The human is this, colonial imperial shape. It's not just a bipedal unit. It's a terrain that spreads out across space-time. It is the transatlantic slave trade. It is militaristic homogeneous clock time. It is the idea that the world is dead. It is whiteness arriving at New York. It is the promise of moving westward. It is all these together, and this is the human. This is what I consider the human: the flattening of trees, encroachment of land. The crack in the ground invites us, to unlearn that. How do we do that? Well, that's a whole new universe of considerations. But I do think how we know the world, how we conduct inquiry, and how we experiment is part of what it means to unlearn mastery.
Yeah, one of my favorite anthropological thinkers, Eduardo Vieira de Castro, because I know you spent some time in Brazil as well. He makes the point, and it's just to what the human is, that even the idea of separating out theory and practice is itself like a liberal theory. So the way, so even, okay, well, let's learn some new things. Okay, well, we'll set up some experiments. You go, no. You're still doing it at that point. And when the crack appears, it's like, well, what other epistemologies are extant that allow the meaning making and as you say, invitation into what happens next post-human, and it's more challenging than people realize. It's that and it's funny, everyone, decolonialism is essential but overused in some respects. People don't realize how deep the structures of what you're calling the human, or that we could call the empire or something, actually go into how we see reality.
Yeah, it's I love that. So you're invoking, conjuring what Elizabeth Lapierre would call post-qualitative research.
Yeah,
which is a hard thing, to wrap one's head around. But it's this. You know how I think about it? I think about it in the words of my culture, that in order to find your way, you must become lost. In order to find your way, you must become lost. And this lostness is decoloniality for me. No, well, not in a reductionist, simplified way, but it's one way that I enter into the rhizome that might be decoloniality. And becoming lost is, for me, becoming fugitive. And it's becoming other. It's like Deleuze said, to think is to become other than what you are. One does not think without becoming something else. So thinking here is queered, not as this cognitive headspace, subjective private event. It's reimagined or reframed as zigzagging through the world, being touched, or touching and being touched in return, being defeated. In the words of Rilke, it's the idea that we become overwhelmed, or I like to say die-overwhelmed, sort of. It's not just a horizontal thing, it's or a vertical thing. It's more how we're crisscrossed. We're cut into different shapes just by thinking. So becoming lost for me seems like a very strong intensity, a circle of convergence that invites us to conduct inquiry in a way that disturbs us, that disturbs the idea that we are primary subjects and the primary knowers, and that that the world knows us in return, and that's a very radical animist concept, that we're known as much as we know, and there is no place to stand on where we can singularly just convert the world into words and language and representation. So I like to think of it this way, Gordon, and maybe just to end this point, that in alien times, such as we are in, the pandemic, orange skies in California, the Anthropocene, also an orange fascist threat, in alien times, the thing to do when we find ourselves surrounded by strangeness is to some extent, meet the world halfway, meet this alien world halfway. The way we have been doing it is through an alien suit. And this alien suit might be thought of as, the whole history of Western thinking, logical empiricism, Humean, Lockean, Cartesian thinking that presumes that the human is a thing apart, and then we come to a place, and I don't want to think of Western thinking as homogeneous, because we have Deleuzian and other continental thinkers, Spinoza, that invite us to say, to think we're not apart from nature at all. Now, what might that invite? This idea that we're not apart from nature. That is decoloniality for me. That is the promise of monsters. That is the promise of becoming lost.
In addition to, as you were describing that process of becoming lost, you just said one of the things you do is to go fugitive, right? And
yes,
and that begs the question. Well, not begs the question. It's just the next question, Bayo. What are fugitive spaces? And again, this is almost very liberal humanist of me. What do we do in them?
Well, I get that. And I hear a chuckle. I chuckle as well about this. There's always, language itself is violent, and there is language is never totalizing. So we're never going to capture, in a sense, all of what this might imply. We can only come to this partially and with a great deal of modesty and humility. I think of fugitivity and fugitive spaces as a state of virtuality, not a state of arrival. Um, and what that might mean in the sense of what we can begin to do today um, is to co-create, if you will, instigated by the world and the ideas and thinking. And thought is ecological, it's not human, by the thinking that now cradles most of us or some of us. It's to co-create a politics of imperceptibility, a politics of invisibility. And this harks back to post-activism. Let me try and put it in concrete, grounded terms. I remember, it feels like 10 years ago, when I watched Greta Thunberg on television. Was it last year, brother, when 100,000 people?
Yeah, has to.
Right?
Last year. Yeah, 2019. Yes, I think so.
2019 is the seems more distant than any other year. So 50 years ago in 2019, I watch Greta Thunberg, and I, it's very inspiring. People on the streets everywhere in hundreds, in 100 countries, I think, or more. I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but lots of countries at least. And instead of feeling just joy, or I don't know what you feel in those moments, I feel a sense of curiosity. I'm curious about the model of agency that our modern architectural spaces invite or instigate. Now, these are millions of people around the world marching on streets and heading to places of power, to make their voices heard. It seems severely imbalanced, like, there's no equity there. Like, just a few folk have to be appealed to, like putting on a weighing scale, millions of people in one cup and a few hundreds in another. And that's the balance of power in modernity. And I felt, aren't there other places of power, in the Anthropocene, which is about the bursting forth of alien life, the repudiation of human centrality? Aren't there other places of power? Aren't there other kinds of wilder coalitions we could be building, at this point in time? And this feeds into post-activism, that there are possibly other responsibilities, other capabilities or incapabilities that we can start to nurture today. So a politics of imperceptibility means for me that we go invisible, and this feeds into fugitivity as well. And I'm not thinking of this as replacing critique or replacing conventional, traditional activism, but at least to some extent supplementary, that there can be places where instead of appealing to the powers that be, we contest the notion that we need to do so in the first place. So Fred Moulton, who wrote the book On the Commons, would say, one does not speak truth to power. One does not speak truth to power. And what that means for me is that one does not speak truth to power because you contest power's claim to exclusivity, that there are other ways to conceive and to organize ourselves in political, social, spiritual imaginaries that does not need to depend on a nation state, which is at this point a cadaver for me. It's a dying beast. It's hollowing out. It doesn't know how to respond to crisis. And so we need to rethink that, probably base our politics on the migrant. And the migrant is not just a human being, but the movement of things around us. If we conceive of politics in that way, then maybe it might be possible for us to think, and to work out and co-create and experiment with the politics of going invisible, where we become some kind of outlaws. Our relationship with the law is testy. It's not quite sure. It's not quite static, where we source knowledge from forbidden sources, from forbidden places, where we learn how to incline ourselves, where we learn how to hide. And hiding, brother, is another epistemology altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How then is, because I want to draw these sort of imaginal and real places into the one discussion. Is sanctuary a kind of fugitive space, or is it something separate?
Repeat the question, brother.
Is sanctuary a kind
sanctuary,
of
right?
Yeah. Is it a fugitive space or is it something separate?
I think it's an inquiry into fugitivity. It's an inquiry with place, with space and place. It's a Deleuzian assemblage that invites us to do the work of unlearning mastery. This is the site of generative incapacitation. This is the site of losing shape. And I borrowed this idea of making sanctuary from my readings, of the functive, historical ideas and medieval practices of sanctuary and claiming sanctuary. It was once, in fact, in Europe, the dominant juridical format. You didn't have lawyers. If you were accused, you ran to a church, as you know, and you claimed sanctuary, and you were granted rest. You were granted rest for a time. And then you were sent on exile most of the time. It didn't quite work out that way. It was banished in the 17th century. Outlawed in the 17th century. Some churches in Belgium, I hear, still practice some form of sanctuary, especially with migrants. However, I think in my reading of that, I noticed that the monster was almost always the welcoming figure at the entrance of sanctuary, in form of a hagode, which is a door knocker, right? You held onto the mouth of a gargoyle or a lion or a dragon, and you claimed sanctuary most of the time in medieval times. And I think maybe that's not, I think of that as an invitation to think that sanctuary is about losing shape, because that's what monsters do, right? Monsters shapeshift us. Monsters disturb our claims to coherence, disturb our claims to integrity. And it's the monster that appears at the edges that invites us to lose confidence in continuity. So I think of sanctuary as the constellation of underground practices that might weave a micropolitics of resistance, and resistance seen as inquiry, and inquiry seen as celebration, and celebration seen as fugitivity, and fugitivity seen as creation, as being at the edge with the world at large.
I like that. I see where you want to add modifiers to the word resistance, because we don't have the right word for it, but because it's not resistance in the sense that we were just talking about, where you reify
fighting
the power
back
structure anyway, but it is a response, and it's we need a word that's like resistance, but also alternatives. It's the generation of alternatives as a form of resistance, or something like that. But again, you got to use the R word. What can you do with language?
Well, language disturbs itself, right? And I've had people come up to me and say, but sanctuary already exists. It exists. There's sanctuaries around the world, and people are kept safe in sanctuaries. When I say, well, language is never stable, right? You could the meanings are always yet to come. And I'm using sanctuary here as in very molecular fashion.
But I also think this is an example, like sanctuary exists, but it's not like the word is copyrighted. You know what I mean? Like it comes, it comes from that notion of making sacred, like it's there in the original, in the first syllable of the sanct, to sanctify, right? So this is what you were talking about. So yes, sanctuary exists. You can go on a spa retreat in Bali, but this is something very different. This is. And I think it's another spell, Bayo. I think it's the right one because it has the promise of rest, and the promise of taking rest and joy seriously, I think.
Yes. And even to stretch the notion of rest even further, I think of rest as taking a break. The way we talk about taking a break. The phrase "taking a break" is duplicitous, right? It's not just taking a holiday. It feels like taking a literal break, like a Yoruba healer would break your bone to heal you. Like one does not become whole without being broken in the first place, and brokenness already conjures and invokes the monster. So rest itself feels like an invitation to transgress the plantations the plantations that proliferate a certain kind of work that use our bodies to reproduce the familiar. So rest is like, and etymologically speaking, rest actually, the Germanic root of rest is to gain distance, to come to a place of distance. So that rest implies travel, ironically. It implies movement, almost like rest implies fugitivity, escaping, building lines of flight away from a circle of convergence. So I think rest ties in with sanctuary, ties in with fugitivity, ties in with decoloniality, ties in with generative incapacitation or fugitive incapacitation, and the monster.
Yeah, definitely. It's again, we fall back into the language, right? But it's a version or a thing that post-activism can be, because if people are hearing this going, okay, cool, I get this, that if I to resist is not just a physical reification of the power structure. It's also like it gives it's an ontological one, because you're actually employing metaphors from physics that show that you're basically going to lose. Like you're talking about the resistance of electrons through certain wires and things, right? So it's a bad spell, right? And I'm sure people are hearing that and going, okay, cool. So and people can't resist this, because what do we do? And rest is a doing. Rest is a doing, but I guess coming to terms with, almost in a Jungian sense, of this notion of sanctuary and its relationship and non-relationship to place. One of the things that I find so inspiring about it is, and inspiring about your use of fugitivity is, I can just do it now. I can just become fugitive now. I can sit with these ideas and what that looks like, and the common surfaces between myself and the power structure or the world or what have you, and it kind of, it's shaped differently for me than it is for other people, but it kind of returns back to that Le Guinian idea of how you play is what you win. Like, this is our, if not it's a we're getting into Haraway territory. Like, this isn't resistance, this is responsiveness and responsibility, right? Like, this is a thing we can do. Sanctuary is a responsibility to what's going on.
Yes, it is a responsibility. It is one out of 1,000 things to do, to invoke Foucault. It is not the thing to do. If it ever tries to be seen as that, I would dissociate from it quickly.
Well, it would become part of the structure then. You can't, the structure requires that finiteness.
Yes. So the virtuality for me is very important. Hence the resistance to settle for method, to design it from start to finish, and then export it to Timbuktu, to Paris, to Senegal, to India, and say this is the way you come out of. No, I think I want to think of it as a trace. Thinking about tracing and mapping in another Deleuzian concept, as a trace. And the thing to do with a trace, a trace is a molar, it's a finite structure. But the thing to do with a trace is to bury it, is to remap it. So you bury it in the ground so that it becomes, or that the rhizomatic quality of it materializes. So if this is not research with place, if this is not research with a table in front of you, if this is not research with ancestors who are always lingering by, and not far away or buried in the past, then I don't know what this is. Then it's just another qualitative, positivistic, attempt at coming out from Egypt and finding our way to Canaan land, if you will. But about what to do, I usually like to draw out the ambiguities there. Brian Masumi would write that we don't just want to focus on the doing something, but also on the something's doing, that the world is actively doing something. It's not that this is left to us. And I feel I want to describe that as another tenet, another very strong intensity constellation in my thinking around post-activism, that it's not left to us. that whales, turtles, trees, and even viruses, thank goodness, in a sense that might be outrageous to many, preposterous to most, thank goodness for the coronavirus. The coronavirus did exert, its agency, stopping carbon emissions, at least for a while, for a spell, getting us to go back into our homes, stopping travel for a moment. It has radically altered the world. There's no returning to a pre-pandemic time. And I say this in spite or noticing that the tensions around loss and deaths and people getting sick are still very, very much alive. And I don't want to state that lightly, but also I want to say that the virus has its own agency, and it did exert its agency in the world and change the world altogether. So there is a sense in which it's not entirely left to us. And then there's the other sense, the sense of doing something that I feel you have beautifully expressed already, Gordon, by saying, maybe I can do it right now. It's not, I don't need to get online and donate $5 to a cause in Kenya. These are the pathways of agency and responsibility in modern settlements. And there are other ways of conceiving. I can do it right now. I can look around me. I can listen deeply. I can listen to these ideas and let these ideas enter into my bones and disturb me. I may not understand them completely. No one does, even me. But there is a space of surrender, of listening to the world around us. And who knows what might happen when we do that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think with this kind of work that is challenging is that by contained within it is a future that is impossible to see. So, because otherwise you're stuck in that sequential directionality. It's like, okay, well, how do I build a fugitive space? And like, well, you don't get it from IKEA. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't come flat packed and you build it. And that's, this is that, it's unlearning mastery, really, isn't it? It's you have to unlearn the mastery of that is sequential time. And so it's, I can do this right now. I can declare fugitivity, and it can be. I mean, I'm fortunate enough. I have teachers in the form of chickens and apple trees and things, because I'm in a permaculture context down here. So when it comes to making sanctuary, I can become immediately aware of non-human agency and how the world is doing its becomingness with, not like with or without me, like I'm insignificant, but that there are other vectors of agency, other flows of it that I can align with or not, right? So I'm actually quite fortunate to be. I can just do fugitive space by participating in like local ecosystemic flourishing. But it is also, I mean, you famously, some of your examples, it's not quite fugitive space, but it is also a slowing down and a choosing of joy, or even finger painting or what have you, in the face of an edificial structure of doing things and sequence and moments having value, and that kind of eternal click of the empire, I guess.
Yeah. I like that you say that the future becomes impossible. That's how I heard what you said. The sequence, the algorithm that just traces us a sui generis line, from us to the yet to come, is that line in the sand. That striation mark is the sands of time have flooded them or flooded it, and possibly that's our salvation. Let me say a few things about the myth of design, what I would call the myth of design. It's another liberal humanist habit of perception to presuppose that we design things. Human beings design things. We designed our way to the moon. We design laptop computers. We design things, and I think that what actually happens, and I'm very, very shy about using actually, as if there's a substrate of reality, like, oh, you're not really looking. No, at least one version what happened. And that's another thing I also shy about, converting the world into an interpretivist thing, as if it has no actuality. So I'm dwelling between two poles there. But what happens, I feel, is that in the act of designing, so to speak, that there are molecular transgressions that we do not have language for, that in many ways we don't notice. The things that we think we are designing us in return, right? They're opening up and infiltrating porous spaces and reshaping us. It's just like that aphorism that the baker needs the dough in much the same way as the dough needs the baker. Like in the very act of converting the world, of acting upon the world, we're acted upon. Design doesn't usually take that into consideration. It usually privileges the human thinker, competencies, anticipation, and all of that, as if these micro transgressions, if you will, molecular movements, are not happening. So that is why I would agree that the future is impossible, and its impossibility is, again, our hope. This hopelessness is our hope.
I think so I have a couple of ways I do that, and one of them is basically to live entirely in, I guess, like an oracular time. Like I'm just going to live according to astrology, but it's more. It's not in a predictive sense. It's in the sense of I think we need to destroy the future, because part of this, and you talk about the virus, but I think there's. And its agency, but there's also, speaking of Foucault, like a biopolitical read of what's going on, which I'm not a fan of. Like the power structure, if you will, has also made great gains this year, right? And one of the things that's rolling out alarmingly as part of this, as part of the flow-on effect apparently to the virus, is pre-crime and monitoring and this sort of these predictive worlds, particularly in the US, but we'll all get them, of, you know,
Minority Report.
Yeah, and so we have policing based on assumptions of future crime that evening, based on movements that are being watched, based on these apps that are now mandatory, and so on. So it seems to me, if like we have to destroy the future, we have to make it impossible, because it's garbage. That seems like it's something that's literally like a it's not a form of resistance, but it's removing a theater of conflict to be to do that to the future, to be like. And it's not even just the sense of being like radically present, another overused term, right? It's more situating yourself in a fugitive space has like an immediacy, and it can't have a sequentially. You can't be doing things for the next sequence, if that. Do you know what I mean? Like in a fugitive space, you can't actually be going, okay, well, here are your 20 steps, and in 18 months you will be there, because that's future business, right? Like that's actually part of the thinking that gets us here. So it needs, this is why I joke like that I'm just going to live with oracular time, because oracular time is fluid. So Aboriginal notions of the dream time and so on, it gives you that the presence of our descendants and our ancestors and so on. You have a fluidity rather than a machine future pre-crime thing that is part of the reorganization of the power structure in 2020, I guess.
Beautifully stated. Yes. I think the future the future circles back. Yoruba people speak about circular slushy time, and how, you know, this idea that the future is just a white mark down the tarmac, you know, just a few steps ahead, is already queered by the idea that time does other kinds of things, temporalities conduct other kinds of businesses. And I really like this notion of, you know, refusing the future, refusing the plantation that produces the future is the same one that discounts the present, discounts now, disturbs the idea of eldership, you know, and treats older people as trash, discardable material, outlaws of some kind, migrants from the economic order, or the proletariat from economic means. And I like the idea that the future is in this thick now, deep time, and that what we do here matters. We're creating temporal structures, and not we, it's a thicker we, obviously. We're creating different things together that disturb the idea that we can just summarily walk forward and find our way in some utopian universe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thicker we is the right way of describing it, because when you were talking about design, I was reminded of Heidegger and Ingold and so on, and the idea that we dwell first and then we build, because it's that same liberal notion that an idea, the design happens in our head and then we impose it on the world as the next sequence of events, but that has never happened even once. People have thought in context, and again, coming back to theory of mind, that human thoughts have humans as well as humans having thoughts, right? So the idea that you somewhere in a bubble and come up with an idea for a house and then the next day start building a house, what Heidegger and Ingold get at with we dwell first and then we build is that every act of creation is at least a co-creation, and it happens in a context, and that sort of, we're building the world and the world is building us, and even build is potentially too artificial a term. It's more a, well, Ingold would say weaving, right? He thinks that's, and it's true, that's a better metaphor for how we shape and are shaped. And I think that works with fugitive spaces and understanding of the future as well. First, it's like, well, how do I build a fugitive space rather? You don't build it, you dwell in it. And then something happens.
Yeah. I love that. So in our work in designing research, it's not about planning and anticipating. Anticipation is also fragile, animated, it's speciated. I don't want to rule it out and say this is pathological, this is something we shouldn't do. It's just to notice that post-humanist processes are already involved there, and we don't actually meet the world in the ways that we think we do, like you've just beautifully described. So we dwell in space, we dwell in place, and then we have to learn to build crazy coalitions. We have to learn to acknowledge that we're in a parliament of beings and voices and other kinds of bodies and agencies, and then work with them to see what happens. Yeah,
I think, Bayo, that's how I understand sanctuary. I think it is that. Again, it's very Harawaian, that those sort of multi-species coalitions, I think, and it's becoming aware. I mean, this is an overused example, but it's becoming aware that you're never not in one. It's just that they, and I hate using the word work, but they thrive and flourish better when you are aware that you're in one. But even your microbiome counts, right? But if you can widen that idea out to other humans and other ideas and the local biosphere and all that, all those kind of animist persons, then you're basically there. Congratulations, you've arrived.
At one point in time, I actually resisted the idea that, or resisted centralizing awareness, because I'm not very fond of the bubble of awareness or consciousness as a thing apart, that is floating. I think it's part of the Cartesian mistake of dualism. But yes, I feel that attending to sanctuary introduces another rhizomatic quality to sanctuary making, that it becomes another material part of sanctuary, that you might say enriches sanctuary that we're already in, right? And it invites us to play with it. I would spell attending as ART and put a slash, as is a very Harawaian Baradian thing to do, and then put tending afterwards. So art and tending, like the very act of noticing is a doing. It's not just ghostly or ghastly gaze, that reproduces the world in some private chamber. It is it is a doing, it is an acting with, it is a becoming with. And I love the idea that we're already there.
Yeah, that's cool. I get what you mean about awareness and so on. I definitely just didn't describe it that way. I conceptualize it almost like weather systems. So it's not turning on the spotlight of the human mind onto an external object as much as it is a thickening or like a high pressure system. So to become aware is it's like a shaping, I guess. But I know what you mean, like attending, and it's because of that, because it's a real act. It's not.
Yes.
You're not playing something on like a screen projector inside your skull. It's not that kind of thing. It's a real act of attending. I like that, attending. That is very Haraway, she does that. My multi-species responsibility, I just think, is so clever. When you read her books, it's like, you should have gone into rap or something, because it's just what she does with words is just perfect.
Yeah, it is rap in some. It's hip hop, and I like the idea that hip hop is the hip hop disturbs the singular and unbothered flow of language. It's like it chops it up into little diffractive bits so that it means more than you think it does. It's like divergence, right? It's straying from the highway and going into the bushes by the side, right? And I like that idea, like speaking like a crossroad.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, sir, this has been a really good chat. I've kept you a little bit longer than I promised. But we spoke principally about sanctuary and fugitive spaces and post-activism. There's some, I use the word metaphysics because I wish to reclaim it, but there was some...
Yeah, we should. Deleuzian metaphysics. Yeah, let's do that. Bring it down to earth.
Absolutely. I think I have this, it is not a joke. Ever since Wittgenstein decided to fix philosophy by breaking it, the most interesting stuff that's happened philosophically, I think, has been in anthropology, because it's been about how you make valid other epistemologies so that they can enrich each other without breaking each other, and that's really hard. And I think they're 50 years ahead of everyone else in doing it. So I joke that my favorite branch of philosophy is anthropology. But
nice.
Yeah, but I guess for people who want to know more about yourself and so on, and in particular if they want to pull on any of these threads, what should they do and where should they go?
Well, I would have invited you to study with me. I'm doing a course called We Will Dance with Mountains, and I say that I would have, but it's closed now because too many people showed up.
It's a good sign, though. Come on.
It is a good problem to have. And we're starting this Sunday, actually, going for 3 months all the way, or 4 months all the way till January. And it's really exciting, also daunting. But you can check my website or my talks on YouTube. But more important to me is that we attend, right? Is that we attend together, we weave together. And that if this feels like an invitation, then let's descend. A politics of surprise awaits us in descending into the cracks, through the cracks, the ruptured and riven places of the earth, where we might hopefully become otherwise.
I love it. Well, thank you so once again. Really, really, really nourishing chat.
I tell you, wonderful talking with you, Dominic. I can't tell you how much.
So I guess the first question to tee up at the end of this episode is, why aren't the rest of you calling me Dominic? It's a way better name. Anyway, there is some additional material, some essays and videos on sanctuary and fugitive spaces, and so on in the show notes if you would like to know more. I'm really excited and captured by the idea, right? So I've been talking about making Rivendell, or we all need to be Rivendells, or the Rivendell Project, for almost a decade now when I add it all together. And it is a proximate description of this notion of sanctuary. And in a way, it's also related to the idea or the concept that James from Hermetics and I spoke about on our Swapcast, about this idea of exit, right? So going fugitive might be something similar to, I guess, exiting in place. Because it's all kind of grappling with the same, what do you do in response when the responses are contained within the system you're trying to respond to, right? So really, really meaty and nourishing stuff to sit with. Hence, there's the additional material in the show notes. And I just want to, on a related note, talk about, or as I was editing the episode, I kind of got my thoughts more bioavailable. I'm going to say coherent. Maybe it is even coherent when it comes to oracular time and destroying the future, right? And for premium members, we've spent a lot of time with this idea of omen logic, in particular in the tarot course. And I kind of been sitting with what oracular time or magical time looks like, because at the moment, and for Q4, I've just completed sort of like an updated version of the Sigils course, because it's a few years old now, right? And as going through the timing, I'm reminded that the Egyptians, the dynastic Egyptians, didn't have a word for a unit of time less than an hour, other than a moment. So they didn't have minutes or seconds. And the hours themselves would breathe with the sun. So much like our planetary hours when you're calculating them based on the length of the day. And the years would breathe with the stars, right? So there were multiple calendars, including like the big Sothic Syrian cycle, if you will. And that feels the sort of eternally correct that I'm trying to go for with oracular time. Now, there's an opportunity, there's a render unto Caesar opportunity when it comes to like linear and sequential time. So setting up calendar alerts so you don't miss Zoom calls, right? So you can kind of outsource machine thinking to the machine. Render unto the machine time, right? And when you can do that, the invitation lands on you to live more in oracular time. And it's a better place to be this quarter of all quarters, right? Because oracular time is a place of signs and wonders, both of those words being capitalized. And that's, again, the right way to sit with momentous moments. And it is a way of destroying the future in that sense, because in oracular time, there is no predictive, artificially intelligenced future. You become fugitive from that, right? So you become fugitive from the machine. And that's one of the ways, I think, for the magically operant, that there is the opportunity to begin thinking with this notion of fugitive spaces. You can be fugitive in time. But yes, really good chat, food for thought, really good end to the custodianship course. And if you want to do more, or if you want to follow me, it's Dominic_White on Twitter. I mean, it isn't, please don't. That person might actually exist. But yes, good chat, food for thought. Until next time.